Alright, welcome to Chapter 18, French Revolution and Napoleon. We're starting with the beginnings of the French Revolution in Section 1. Alright, so here we go. Alright, background of the French Revolution. There are some long-term causes to the French Revolution. Condition of the French society had declined. Remember we talked about Louis XIV spending so much money on the Palace of Versailles, spending a lot of money in the wars against England. Louis XVI had done the same things. So the state of the French society is very poor. The common everyday person is very poor. So they're dealing with what looks to be a rich country, but is suffering very deeply on the inside, and people are just starving for food, and the costs of food are going up constantly. You also have the three estates that were established back in the Middle Ages. First estate was the clergy, second estate the nobility, and the third estate was all the commoners. So, and this system was based on inequality. And not having the same for every group. So the first estate, the clergy, they make up around 130,000 people, but that small amount of people, which is about 0.05% of the population, they made up or own 10% of the land. So extreme amount of land for a small amount of people. They are exempt from the taille, which is the tax. And it was a tax that the king had come up with long ago. The clergy were exempt from that tax and therefore didn't pay anything. So you've got some of the richest people in the community, in the country, not paying any of the taxes whatsoever. Even within the clergy, they were radically divided. They had the higher clergy who were more attached to the nobility, who believed in this system and wanted this system to continue. Then you had your normal everyday parish priests who were out on the streets, involved with the commoners, interacting with the commoners, and they often shared the views of the commoners. So even within the group, there was some radical separation. And that's what makes the French Revolution so unique, is that not only is there division in the major groups, but there's division within the divisions of the major groups. So you have more sectionalism, more minority groups who are looking out for their own best interests, and some of them cross to different levels, to different sides, to different estates, to different groups, and it makes it very complicated. It was not as cut and dry as the American Revolution. It was not as cut and dry as patriots and loyalists. In this, there are many different levels to it, many different segments, and that's part of the reason that it is so demanding, and that it is so different, and that we get so many things that happen or go on. Alright, second estate. Second estate was the nobility. It made up about 350,000 people, or 1.5% of the population. So you got 0.5% of the population owning 10% of the land. You got 1.5% of the population owning 25 to 30% of the land. Unbalanced. So they are also exempt from the taille. So who's the only group paying the taille? The third estate, the commoners. Both the first estate and the second estate, the people that held 50%, around 50% of the land, 40 to 50% of the land, 40 to 50% of the wealth, okay, they are not paying any taxes whatsoever. Alright? It's unbalanced. It's inequality. And it's what sets this off. These nobility held high offices in the government, military, the courts, and even in the church. Okay, they sought to expand their power at the expense of the monarchy. Now, here's where another level of it where it gets a little tricky. The nobility are trying to establish their own power over the power of the monarchy, and the monarchy is trying to establish their power over the nobility. And at the same time, they're both trying to keep the third estate from getting any advantages into this system. So again, there's many different levels in this French Revolution, and it gets very complicated. The third estate. Third estate was a majority of the population. 98% of the population were within the third estate. And 80% of that 98%, 75 to 80% of that population were peasants who owned less than 40% of the land. So you have 98% of your population owning less than 40% of the land. Some had some aristocratic privileges and were divided, but most were peasants or skilled workers. And this even divides them within their differences. Skilled workers and peasants not looking out for the same things. Skilled workers want to move into that aristocratic level. They want to own their own businesses. They want to move into the nobility, and they're trying to move into the nobility. So they kind of associate with them, and they have friends that are nobles, even though they're not quite there yet. And so again, complications because of all of the different levels of society that were going on, and all of this established since the Middle Ages. Okay. Third estate includes the bourgeoisie, or the middle class. So these are the people that are trying to escape into that aristocrat level, into that nobility level. They own 20 to 25% of the land, and they wanted to enter those ranks. They wanted to get into those public offices. But they're still drawing ideals from the Enlightenment period, and they're unhappy about the monarchy. They're unhappy about having to pay the taille, because they're the only group that's doing it, and most of the money's coming from the middle class. The peasants couldn't afford to pay the tax. The others could not afford to pay the tax. The homeless, the whatever else there were out there, couldn't afford to pay the tax. Middle class could afford to pay the tax, and they were shelling out most of the money, and then they're constantly being asked to give more money. So they're definitely unhappy with what the monarchy is doing, and they did have enough money, not all the money, but they had enough money to then challenge the king for his authority. So the financial crisis is in full effect. Louis XVI, who is the king, who is in control, has the power. He calls for the States General to come back. Now, we talked a long time ago about the States General and the French Parliament. But he calls for it to come back. The first time that you're going to see the Estates General since 1614. And the Estates General is that governing body that can make rules and have rules apply. Now, the Estates General was unequally balanced. You had 3 votes. 1 vote for the first estate, 1 vote for the second estate, 1 vote for the third estate. So when the third estate comes in and says, we want no tax exemptions for anybody, and the first estate and the second estate are both getting tax exemptions, how do you think they vote? Obviously, no. So, you got the first estate, all of the members of the first estate come together, they put in their 1 vote. We vote no. All the members of the second estate get together, they put in their vote. We vote no. All the members of the third estate come together, they vote, we vote yes, sorry, you're outnumbered 2-1. So they appealed to the king. Meeting on May 5th, 1789 at Versailles. The king is there. They have this meeting. They go through the process. They get turned down. They go to the king and say, King, what are you going to do about this? It's not fair. We have most of the people, yet they're exempt from the tax. And they got all the money. And he says, sorry, I agree with them. Because he wanted to keep the nobility happy, because he knew that they were trying to take over his monarchical power. They were trying to get rid of him anyway. So if he keeps the nobility happy, then maybe he can hang around for a while. So the king demanded no change. The third estate leaves the National Assembly, or the Estates General, and forms what they call the National Assembly. So June 17th, 1789, the National Assembly is formed. This National Assembly consisted of the Third Estate. Some of the members of the Second Estate decided to leave, and they thought it was unjust the way the Third Estate was being treated. So they left the Second Estate and went and joined the Third Estate, went and joined the National Assembly, and wanted something different. Some of them left because they wanted to get rid of the king. So they joined the National Assembly as well, to get rid of the king, because they knew that independence movements were coming about. Okay? And they decide to draft a constitution, writing a new constitution and setting up a new government for the country of France. As we've talked before with the American Revolution, people who do this are basically committing treason against their country and can be prosecuted, hung, treated in whatever way possible. All right? So this happens. The king hears about it. He wants to put a stop to it. So he sends a group of guys to go down to the building where the National Assembly is meeting. Okay, they have adjourned, and they're coming back at a later time to continue to try and write this constitution. He sends a group down to the building that they're meeting at and says, lock the gates, lock the doors. So they lock the doors. The National Assembly group comes back to find the doors locked. How do we get in? We can't get in. Can't kick the doors down. So they leave and go down the street to what is a indoor tennis court. Yes, they play tennis, and yes, they played it indoors. So they go to an indoor tennis court that was not being used at the time, and they break into it basically, and they go inside and they say, we are not leaving until we draft a new constitution for France. And they write a new constitution for the country of France. The storming of the Bastille happens on July 14th, 1789. Again, these guys are committing treason. So in order to protect them, the group knew that they had to get ammo, weapons, powder, everything they needed to protect these guys. So they stormed the Bastille on July 14th, 1789. This was a old armory. There was also a prison. There were prisoners in the top levels. They broke in. They stole the guns and weapons from the bottom. They killed some of the officers that were there. They killed the head guy that was in charge, the warden. And they free all the political prisoners. The Bastille was holding political prisoners. They free all the political prisoners that are within the Bastille, and then they tear the whole entire building down. And today you can go to France and walk on what used to be the Bastille, because they took the bricks of the Bastille and built a bridge within Paris. They built a bridge out of the old stones of the Bastille. And they have a sign on it that says, here's the last remnants of the old regime. we are walking across and stomping out our existence of a new independent France, or something like that is the sign that goes over the bridge there. All right, Declaration of the Rights of Man is written August 26, 1789. This is basically like a Bill of Rights for the Americans, or the Declaration of Independence. They're writing about freedom and equal rights for all men, especially if you own property. End all tax exemptions. Public office should be held on talent, not by who you know, type things. So this is getting very, very, you're getting a bunch of outspoken groups, you're getting a bunch of things going on. The king's having to deal with these situations, and he's also having to deal with the money problems within France. And the money is really what gets him. The low level of society, the demands of taxes. Every day the bread would go up in price, and we know that bread was a mainstay of their diet. We've talked about it over and over again, that they use bread as part of a filler to help, with their diet, and getting that into their diet was a major thing for them. So the women of Paris storm basically the Palace of Versailles, because they had been going to the market on a daily basis, and every day the price of the bread went up. So now they're tired of it, and they storm the palace building. And when they storm the palace building, they capture the king and his wife and his children and say, look, you're going back to Paris. You're going to go to Paris, and you're going to deal with all this stuff. You're the king. Step up, be in charge, and deal with the things that are going on. And Louis says, okay, I will return to Paris, and I will deal with what's going on. And this really drops his level of power and drops his status within the country. Not happy with the first constitution, they begin to write a second constitution. The legislative assembly is formed to make laws. The Constitution of 1791 had some changes to it. It's not necessary that you know exactly what those changes were, but they had some fears that the king would come back to power, that the king, that other countries around would then look at it as, okay, we need to go change what's happening there because they're just getting rid of their king, and that's not good. So they put a new king, they put the king into the Constitution of 1791, allowing him to exist. But they also changed stuff like men who paid specific amount in taxes could vote. And then basically they put the king under house arrest. You're going to stay in Paris and deal with these situations, even though we're going to allow you to still kind of run the country. So Louis XVI, fearing the worst, seeing the writing on the wall, seeing that he's possibly going to be killed, decides to attempt to escape. In June of 1791, he escapes all the way to the Austrian border. Him and his wife Marie Antoinette, who is from Austria, they had connections in Austria, trying to get back there. Right at the border, they're captured by some French who are some revolutionary types, and they bring him all the way back to Paris and put him officially in jail. All right, Austria then comes to fight for the king, Louis XVI. They want to restore him back to the throne, but the initial fighting goes bad for France, but it changes with guys like Napoleon, who were part of the army, coming to the forefront. And then you have the rise of the Paris Commune. Paris Commune was a radical political group who came in to control
the things that were going on to protect France from outside intervention. This group takes capture of the king, keeps him in jail. The National Convention, they want to form a national convention or a legislative body that can make laws for the country. They want universal male suffrage, or the idea of every man being able to vote, not just those that own property. And then they also want or become known as the sans-culottes, or those without breeches. Their pants were a little bit shorter because they couldn't pay the money for the full-length pants that were more expensive, made out of better material, all this other kind of stuff. All right, so that's the end of Section 1. We'll cover Section 2 tomorrow. Have a good night.